I remember that drive like it just happened last night. The kind that gets under your skin before you even know why. The road to Pine Hollow Cemetery isn't on any GPS. You just keep following the old timber route off Highway 87 until the asphalt gives up and turns into gravel. After that, it's 23 minutes of dirt, pine, and silence. No streetlights, no traffic, not even a mailbox. Just that long, pale strip of dust floating in my headlights like snow caught mid-air. I rolled the window halfway down to fight the fog inside the truck. The cold slapped my face, sharp enough to wake me good. Montana nights do that. Cut right through denim and bone. The radio barely worked that far out. Every station turned to static except one. Some old AM preacher talking about the wages of sin being death. I clicked it off quick. The silence felt cleaner than his voice. I'd been driving for nearly 40 minutes, and not once had I passed another car. Just me, a thermos of burnt coffee, and a half-moon hanging above the tree line. Truth is, I didn't take this job because I wanted it. I took it because I didn't have many choices left. The winter before, I'd lost my father. Then the shop I worked at, small engine repair, closed down. I guess I started looking for places that didn't need much out of me. Somewhere quiet. Somewhere that didn't ask questions. So when I saw the posting for night caretaker at Pine Hollow Cemetery, I thought, how bad can it be? Graves don't talk back. The guy on the phone, Harold Clay, just said, "Shift starts at 10. Bring gloves." No paperwork, no background check, nothing. That should have been my first clue something was off. By the time I hit the last stretch of road, my headlights caught the sign, Pine Hollow Memorial Grounds, established 1879. The letters were cracked and full of moss, the kind of green that glows under moonlight. The gate stood open, two wrought iron doors leaning slightly inward, like they were waiting for me to decide if I really wanted to come in. I cut the engine and sat there a minute, listening to it tick in the cold. That's when I noticed it. The sound. Not wind, not crickets, nothing. Just an absence so deep it felt like the world was holding its breath. There's a kind of quiet in the country that feels alive, like the earth itself is listening. This was different. This quiet felt expectant. I told myself I was just tired, nerves playing tricks, but my hand still hesitated on the door handle. I'd done plenty of night shifts before, but this one felt heavier somehow, like stepping into someone else's dream. When I finally opened the door, the gravel crunched under my boots, echoing too loud. The air smelled of pine sap, damp earth, and something faintly metallic, like rust or blood. A thin fog clung low to the ground, swirling between the headstones that I could just make out past the gate. It wasn't thick enough to hide anything, but it was enough to blur the edges, to make the place seem bigger than it probably was. The office light was still on up ahead. That's where I was supposed to meet Harold Clay, the man who'd called me. The man who, for reasons I didn't yet understand, worked nights in a cemetery where no one ever visited. I grabbed my thermos, shut the truck door, and started toward the gate. My breath came out white, twisting in the air before vanishing. Halfway there, a lone owl called from somewhere in the trees. The sound broke through the stillness like a crack in glass, and just as quickly, it stopped. When I reached the gate, I saw the padlock hanging open, chain rusted but cleanly broken at the hinge, as if someone had snapped it by hand. That's when the first thought hit me, clear as day. I should turn around, but I didn't, because when you've got nowhere else to be, you start convincing yourself danger's just another kind of company. So I pushed the gate open and stepped through. The hinges groaned, long and low, like something waking up. I told myself it was just the wind, just metal and cold. But deep down, I swear, it sounded like the cemetery was sighing. And that's how my first night at Pine Hollow Cemetery began. I spotted him before he spoke. Tall figure by the office, standing in the kind of stillness you only see in people who've been out in the dark too long. The light from a single lantern swung beside him, soft, yellow, and too weak to touch the corners of his face. The flame made the snowflakes drift like dust. He didn't move when I approached, just kept one hand on the pole and the other tucked into the pocket of his wool coat. "You're early," he said. His voice wasn't loud, but it carried. Gravelly, like he hadn't used it much lately. "Figured I'd rather be early than lost," I answered, trying to sound casual. He gave a small nod. No smile, no handshake, just a nod, like he'd been expecting me the way the ground expects rain. He looked like he'd been carved right out of the land around him, lean, weathered. Eyes a pale gray that almost matched the fog. His name tag, old brass and tarnished, read H. Clay. That was my introduction to Harold Clay, head caretaker of Pine Hollow Cemetery, and for the next 6 hours, the only living soul for miles. He gestured toward the small brick office behind him. The windows were frosted, one cracked near the top. "Let's get you squared away," he said. Inside smelled of coffee, kerosene, and wet wool. There was a small desk cluttered with handwritten logbooks, a thermos, and what looked like an old .22 rifle leaning in the corner. "Sign-in sheet," he said, pointing to a lined notebook. "You write your name and time when you arrive, and again when you leave. That way, if you don't make it out, we know when you stopped being here." He said it so plainly that I almost missed the weight of it. I laughed a little under my breath, expecting him to crack a grin. He didn't. After a long silence, he reached for a folded paper pinned to the corkboard on the wall. The corners were curled, the ink faded, but the title was still bold. "Rules for Night Staff, Pine Hollow Cemetery." He peeled it off the board and held it toward me. "Read these before you start." I glanced at the list and immediately smirked. "Are these serious?" I asked. He raised an eyebrow. "As serious as frostbite." The rules were typed in uneven lines, probably made on an old typewriter. 1. Lock the north gate by 10 o'clock p.m. sharp, even if you're inside. 2. Never walk past Section D after midnight. 3. If you hear whistling, don't answer. 4. Do not relight the lamps once they go out. 5. If a visitor arrives after dark, tell them the cemetery is closed. No exceptions. 6. At dawn, leave through the south gate only, never the north. I looked up after reading and said, "You serious with this? Sounds like something out of a ghost story." Harold met my eyes, dead calm. "It's a story, all right, but it ain't a ghost one." I waited for him to elaborate, but he just started filling his pipe, slow and careful. The only sound was the soft pop of the lantern flame. Finally, I asked, "So, what happens if someone forgets?" He looked out the window toward the rows of graves where the fog was thickening. "They don't forget twice," he said. I didn't know if he meant they got fired or something worse. The tone didn't help. It wasn't a warning. It was a statement of fact, plain and cold. I tried to laugh it off again. Said something like, "Guess every job's got its superstitions." He turned then, finally facing me full on. "You'll learn quick, kid. The ground remembers who respects it, and who don't." That shut me up. He handed me a flashlight, old but heavy duty, the kind that could double as a weapon. "Power goes out sometimes," he said. "Never trust the dark here. It don't always stay empty." When he said that, I noticed something behind him, on the wall, next to a faded map of the cemetery. Photographs. 8 of them, black and white, pinned neatly in 2 rows. Each showed a different man standing near the same gate, same lantern pole, all wearing the same caretaker coat, all staring straight at the camera. The last one, bottom right, was blank, just a name under it, pending. I opened my mouth to ask, but Harold spoke first. "You'll make your rounds every hour on the hour. Check locks, lamps, and record any disturbances. Don't go past Section D. Don't relight lamps. Don't open the north gate once it's closed." He said it like a mantra, like something memorized long ago. When I asked about Section D, he just said, "That's the part that never settled right." Then, with that same flat tone, he added, "If you see lights moving out there, or hear voices that sound like someone you know, ignore them. That's how they test you. I stood there, the flashlight heavy in my hand, pretending not to notice the tremor in my grip. He took a long drag from his pipe, then exhaled through his nose. The smoke drifted toward the window, mixing with the fog pressing against the glass. Finally, he said, "Clock in, kid. The dead don't like to wait." And just like that, Harold Clay stepped out into the cold, leaving the door half open behind him. I stood alone in that little brick office, rules in hand, staring at my reflection in the window. And for a split second, I could have sworn there was someone standing behind me in the dark. By midnight, the cold had settled into my bones the way grief does, quiet but permanent. The cemetery was still, too still. My breath came out in little white puffs, the only thing moving in that heavy air. I'd done my rounds twice already. The gates were locked, lamp steady, no tracks but my own. Nothing to write in the logbook but frost on the benches and a stray raccoon near the shed. I remember leaning against the fence line near the chapel, taking a sip from my thermos. The coffee had gone lukewarm, but I drank it anyway, more for the company than the caffeine. And then I saw it. At first, I thought my eyes were playing tricks, maybe a reflection off a headstone or a passing car. But there were no cars out here, no roads close enough for headlights. It was a faint glow, soft, like moonlight, except the moon was hidden behind the clouds. It came from the far edge of the property, near the back corner where the oldest stones leaned like tired teeth. Section D. Harold had said to stay away from there after midnight. His voice echoed in my head as clear as if he were standing next to me. That's the part that never settled right. I told myself it was probably a solar light someone forgot to turn off or a couple of kids pulling a prank. Montana teens love testing graveyards for courage points, and I wasn't about to let some local punks make me look scared on my first night. So I started walking. The ground dipped as I went, the grass fading into frozen soil. Each step sounded louder the closer I got, boots crunching against gravel, the sound carrying across the graves like whispers. The air got colder, too. Not the usual kind of night chill, but the kind that feels wrong. Like you've stepped into a place where air shouldn't exist. Even the fog seemed different there, thicker, moving in slow spirals instead of drifting. When I got within 50 feet, I realized the light wasn't a bulb or reflection at all. It was fog, glowing faintly from underneath the ground, pulsing like something breathing. It curled out between the old stones, soft and rhythmic, the way lungs move under a bedsheet. For a long second, I just stood there, staring. Every instinct told me to back up. But curiosity's got a way of being louder than fear. So I crouched down, shining my flashlight over the nearest headstone. The name was almost gone, but I could just make out the letters. Elijah Boone, 1874 to 1901. The stone was cracked clean through the middle, and around the edges, frost was melting. That's what made me stop. Melting frost in 20-degree weather. The ground beneath the grave looked wet, almost like it had been disturbed. I brushed the surface with my glove. It wasn't just wet. It was warm. That's when I heard it. A low hum, deep and steady, coming from below. Not the sound of machinery or pipes, more like a vibration, a slow resonance that I could feel through my knees. It rose and fell, like the rhythm of a sleeping animal. I switched off my flashlight for just a moment. That's when I realized the glow wasn't coming from the fog. It was coming from the soil itself. The light pulsed once, twice, and with each pulse, I swore I saw shapes forming in the mist. Faces. Not sharp or clear, just impressions. Eyes, mouths, hollow shadows looking up through the vapor. A gust of wind came from nowhere, carrying a sound that froze me mid-breath. Whistling. Faint at first, like someone far away walking home in the dark. Rule 3 flashed in my mind. If you hear whistling, don't answer. I didn't. God knows I didn't even breathe. The whistling grew closer, circling me, the pitch rising and falling like it was following the glow in the ground. Every hair on my arms stood up beneath my jacket. I turned and started walking back, steady, not running, not panicking. Every step, I could feel it behind me, the soft drag of air, the shifting hum underfoot. Halfway up the path, my flashlight flickered once, twice, then went out completely. For one heartbeat, I stood in total blackness, and in that blackness, I swear I heard someone whisper, "Don't relight it." The voice wasn't Harold's. It wasn't mine. It came from the dark itself. When I reached the main road again, I looked back. The fog in Section D had gone still. No glow, no hum, nothing. Just a line of graves under the moon, quiet as they should be. I didn't tell Harold about it the next morning. Didn't need to. When I walked into the office, he looked up from his logbook and said, without even asking, "You saw the glow, didn't you?" I just nodded. He closed the book, took a long drag from his pipe, and said, "Yeah, they don't like being forgotten." I was halfway through my third round when I heard it. You ever notice how some sounds don't belong to a place? How they carry a kind of weight, like they were meant for somewhere else entirely? That's what it felt like. A whistle, faint at first, low and lazy, like someone trying to pass time while walking. It drifted across the graves, the notes bending with the wind, but the branches around me didn't move. It took me a second to place the tune. Home on the Range, something my dad used to hum while fixing his truck. That kind of plain, familiar melody that sticks to your ribs. Out here, though, it sounded different. Slower. Almost wrong. At first, I figured it had to be Harold. Maybe he was checking if I'd follow the rules. Maybe he got bored and wanted to spook the new guy. So I cupped my hands and called out, "Nice try, old man." The echo came back a beat too late. Then the whistling stopped. Silence. That heavy Montana silence again, where you can hear the blood moving in your ears. I waited, counted 5 slow breaths. Then the whistling started again, right behind me. I turned so fast my boots scraped the gravel. The flashlight beam swung wild, slicing through the fog. Nothing. Just stones, bare trees, and the kind of emptiness that stares back. The air around me had changed. You could feel it. Still, dense, like stepping into a place where sound doesn't work right anymore. "Harold?" I called again, quieter this time. My voice didn't carry far. It felt muffled, like the night was swallowing the words. That's when I remembered Rule 3. If you hear whistling, don't answer. And my stomach dropped because I already had. Twice. The tune came again, closer this time, clearer, and low enough that I could hear the breath between the notes. Whoever was doing it was standing maybe 10 feet behind me. I forced myself to turn slowly, sweeping the light across the headstones. Still nothing. No movement, no footprints. But the fog was changing, curling, tightening into thin vertical shapes, like something trying to remember how to stand. Then, faintly, I caught something out of the corner of my eye, a figure near the willow tree by Section D. I thought it was Harold again, but it was too tall, too still. And the worst part? It was facing the wrong way, turned toward the graves, not toward me. "Hey!" I called out before my brain could stop me. The moment I spoke, the whistling stopped mid-note. The figure's head twitched, just a quick, sharp jerk, and slowly turned. My flashlight flickered, and in that half-second of light, I saw it. Not a face, just the outline of one. Eyes glowing faint like coal through frost, mouth half open, but no sound came out. I stumbled backward, dropped the flashlight, and it rolled down the path, spinning until it landed face up in the dirt. And there it was again, the whistling, but now it was all around me, every direction at once, as if the whole cemetery had started breathing through one tune. I covered my ears, but it didn't stop. It was inside my head now, vibrating through my skull. That same broken melody repeating, slower each time. Then it stopped. Just gone. The flashlight beam steadied. The fog thinned. The figure by the willow was gone. I don't know how long I stood there, shaking. Could have been seconds. Could have been minutes. All I know is I finally picked up the flashlight and started walking back toward the office. Every crunch of gravel sounded too loud, like I was waking something that preferred I stay quiet. When I reached the office door, I glanced back one last time. Nothing moved, but for a split second, I could still hear it. So faint, I might have imagined it. One final note of Home on the Range. Except this time, it was coming from inside the office. It was close to 1:30 in the morning when I saw the glow of headlights breaking through the fog near the north gate. At first, I thought maybe it was Harold coming back from town, though I'd never once seen him leave during a shift. But the beam of those lights looked different. Too white, too clean, like a new car, not the old rusted pickup Harold drove. The hum of the engine grew louder, crunching over the gravel. Then it stopped. I set down my logbook and stepped outside. The fog was rolling low and thick across the ground, but I could still make out the shape of a small sedan idling near the gate. A woman stepped out, mid-40s maybe, pale, tired eyes. She was dressed for warmth, heavy coat, scarf, but her face looked wrong for the hour. You know how grief makes people look older than they really are? That kind of wrong. She held a small bouquet of flowers, lilies by the looks of it, and walked right up to the gate like she'd been here 100 times before. "Ma'am," I called out, "we're closed for the night. You'll have to come back in the morning." She didn't answer right away, just stood there gripping the flowers like they were the only thing keeping her upright. Finally, she said, "Can I see my husband? Just for a minute?" Her voice cracked halfway through the sentence, small and soft, like she'd been crying for hours. Rule 5 popped into my head. If a visitor arrives after dark, tell them the cemetery is closed. No exceptions. But I hesitated, because there's something about real grief. You can feel it in the air, like static, and she had it. I took a step closer. "Who's your husband, ma'am?" She blinked slowly, eyes unfocused. "Michael, Section C. He hated sleeping alone." Her lips trembled, and for just a moment, I almost said yes. Just a minute, I thought. What harm could it do? But then the fog shifted behind her, slow at first, then curling upward like smoke. And in that gray light, I realized something wasn't right. The flowers in her hand weren't real. Their color was gone, drained to paper white, and frost had formed along the edges of the petals, even though it wasn't nearly cold enough for ice. That's when I heard a crunch of gravel behind her. A single step, then another. From the shadows near the tool shed, a voice said, calm and steady, "Cemetery's closed, ma'am." It was Harold Clay. He stepped forward with his lantern, the light catching the fog in gold halos. The woman didn't seem startled, didn't even turn toward him at first. When she did, she gave the smallest, saddest smile I've ever seen. "Just a minute," she said again. "He doesn't like it when I leave." Harold's tone stayed even. "I know, ma'am, but you can't be here after dark. You know that." For the first time, I realized he was talking to her like they'd spoken before, like this wasn't her first visit. The woman lowered her head, clutching the bouquet against her chest. "I'm cold," she whispered. Her breath didn't fog the air, and then she was gone, just like that. No sound, no flash, no trick of the light. One moment she was standing there, the next there was nothing. The flowers she'd been holding fell to the ground on the other side of the gate, perfectly still. I looked past Harold at the road. No car, no tire tracks, not even the glow of taillights fading down the hill. "Where'd she go?" I asked, my voice thin and dry. Harold didn't answer right away. He just looked at the empty space where she'd been, jaw tight, eyes fixed on the frost-coated lilies lying in the dirt. Finally, he said, "That's why we keep the gates locked. Sometimes they forget they're gone." He turned and started back toward the office. lantern light flickering across his face. I stayed there another full minute, staring through the bars of the gate, half expecting her to come back or the car to reappear, but there was nothing. Just the hum of the wind and the faint scent of lilies in the cold. When I finally followed Harold inside, I noticed something that made my chest tighten. The frost from those flowers had spread, tiny crystals glinting along the threshold of the office door, leading straight to my boots. I didn't say a word. Didn't have to, because Harold already knew what I'd seen. He just muttered, almost to himself, "That's one more that still thinks love outruns death." And for the rest of that night, I couldn't stop wondering if she was the one who'd been whistling before, or the one being whistled to. It was just past 2 a.m. when it happened. I was sitting at the desk, trying to steady my nerves with a cup of coffee that had long since gone cold. The office lamp buzzed softly, that low electric hum that fills empty rooms. And outside, the fog had thickened again. Every now and then I'd hear the wind shift, carrying the creak of tree limbs from the ridge above the cemetery. That's when one of the oil lamps outside the office flickered. It was the lamp mounted to the post by the door, the one Harold had told me never to touch. I remember the light dimming slowly, the flame dancing inside the glass until it went out completely. I stared at it for a while, expecting Harold to show up and fix it, but the minutes ticked by, and the darkness outside started to press against the windows, thick as water. And without really thinking, I said to myself, "It's just a lamp." I grabbed a box of matches from the shelf and stepped outside. The cold hit me like a wall. My breath came out white and heavy. The world beyond that single dark post felt unreal. Rows of graves fading into the fog, the smell of oil and damp soil clinging to the air. I struck a match. The sound of it flaring up seemed too loud, too sharp, like the cemetery itself was listening. When I touched the flame to the lamp wick, it caught immediately. Only it didn't burn orange. It burned blue. A cold, unnatural blue, the color of frozen fire. And the moment it lit, the temperature dropped another 10 degrees. My lungs burned from the cold, and every instinct in my body screamed that I'd just done something I shouldn't have. Then I saw it, on the window of the office behind me. Handprints, small, child-sized, pressed from the inside. 5 distinct shapes, each fogging the glass as though someone was standing just behind it, breathing slow and steady. I froze. Couldn't move, couldn't breathe. I'd locked that office door when I stepped out. I was sure of it. The blue light from the lamp shimmered against the window, and in that glow, I saw movement. Something small, a shadow shifting just out of view, like a kid crouched low beneath the desk. "Harold?" I called out. My voice cracked in the cold. No answer. I took one step closer to the door, heart pounding in my ears. The handprints were still there, pressed hard enough that the glass started to creak, and then one of the hands moved. The prints dragged slowly downward, smearing the fog as though the child behind the glass was sliding toward the floor. I dropped the matchbox. The noise snapped me out of it. When I looked up again, the window was empty. I spun around, and that's when I saw him, Harold Clay, standing at the edge of the road, lantern in hand, coat whipping in the wind that hadn't been there a second ago. The look on his face wasn't anger. It was disappointment. He didn't shout, didn't even walk closer. Just said, quietly, "Never relight them." His voice carried, low and tired. "They go out for a reason." Then he turned and walked off toward the hill, lantern swinging at his side, the flame inside flickering the same dull gold it always had. I stood there staring after him, the blue light still burning behind me, that strange, cold fire dancing inside the glass. Then, slowly, it began to fade, shrinking until all that was left was a wisp of smoke curling up into the night. When I finally went back inside, I locked the door and looked at the window again. The glass was clean. No prints, no smudges. But on the inside of the sill, where the frost had started to form, Someone had traced a message with one small finger. 4 words. Don't let them out. The frost melted around the letters as I watched, dripping slowly onto the logbook below. That was the moment I realized something about Pine Hollow. The dead didn't just rest there. They paid attention, and when you break the rules, they notice. By 3:15, the world had gone completely still. The fog was so thick now that even the moonlight couldn't find its way through. Everything looked washed out, pale, weightless, silent. I was doing my last sweep before dawn, trying to shake off the chill that had settled into me hours ago. My flashlight beam cut through the mist like a blade, but only for a few feet at a time. Beyond that, it was like shining into milk. The walk from the chapel to the veterans section always took me past a line of iron crosses. Simple markers, just names and dates. Nothing fancy. The oldest ones went back to World War I. Men who'd been buried before the road to the cemetery even had a name. Normally, that section was quiet, but that night, something felt off. The air was heavy, not just cold, but dense, like it was pressing down on my chest. And under my boots, I felt a faint vibration. At first, I thought it was a generator, or maybe the wind carrying a truck's engine from the highway miles off, but the sound didn't fade or shift. It just stayed there, deep and steady like a heartbeat. I crouched down and placed my gloved hand against the ground. The vibration got stronger, not a rumble, a hum, low, constant, almost musical. It wasn't random either. There was rhythm to it, a rise, a fall, like something alive, breathing far beneath the frost. Then the hum changed. It started to splinter, breaking into patterns, threads of different tones, overlapping. And that's when I realized what I was hearing wasn't sound, it was voices, soft, faint, layered one over another, like 100 people whispering through the dirt. I leaned closer before I even thought about it. The words didn't make sense at first. Fragments of sentences, old and cracked, some barely more than a sigh. Then one voice came clear enough to cut through the rest. It said my name. Not shouted, not even spoken loud. Just a breath, right there in my ear. Eli. I jerked back so fast I nearly dropped the flashlight. It hit the ground and rolled, spinning the light across the markers. For half a second, I thought I saw shapes moving between the crosses. Shadows that didn't belong to anything standing. The hum underfoot deepened. The ground gave a soft groan, like old wood bowing under weight. One of the headstones, Private James H. Tolley, 1918, began to tremble, faint at first, then more. That's when instinct took over. I didn't care about protocol or pride or pretending anymore. I ran, boots crunching over frost, heart pounding so loud it drowned the hum. The fog seemed thicker now, heavier, like the whole cemetery was watching me leave. I didn't stop until I hit the main path. I leaned against the fence, bent double, trying to catch my breath. When I finally looked back, the section was quiet again. Still. Empty. The vibration had stopped. The fog had lifted just enough to see the crosses standing straight, their shadows long and motionless in the weak light from the lamps. For a moment, I thought I imagined it all. Maybe it was just exhaustion, my mind turning the wind into whispers. That's what I wanted to believe, but then I noticed my hand, the one that had touched the ground. The glove was damp, soaked through with something darker than water. I peeled it off, and the smell hit me first, metallic, earthy, old. The tips of my fingers were black with soil, and pressed faintly into the skin of my palm were 5 small indentations, shaped like fingertips. Not my own. I wiped them off, but the feeling didn't go away. That electric tingle, like something had reached up through the dirt and touched back. When I got to the office, Harold was already inside, sitting in the dark with the lantern unlit. He didn't look at me when he spoke. "They don't like being listened to," he said quietly. "That's why we keep our distance. You listen too long, they start remembering you." He finally looked up, eyes dull behind the glass of his spectacles. Then he added, "You should wash your hands." And in the silence that followed, I realized something. The hum hadn't stopped. It was still there, not in the ground this time, but in me. Faint, steady, and getting louder. When I got back to the office, Harold was already there. The lantern burned low, barely touching the edges of his face, and the air smelled thick with coffee and kerosene. He was sitting at the small wooden table, coat still on, steam rising from 2 chipped mugs. Without a word, he pushed one toward me. "Drink," he said. "You look like you've seen the ground breathe." I didn't answer. I didn't have to. My hands were still trembling, faint dirt stains etched into the skin no matter how much I'd scrubbed them. We sat in silence for a while, the kind of silence that feels heavy enough to break. Outside, the wind picked up just enough to make the eaves creak. Finally, Harold spoke. "You're wondering what's wrong with this place," he said. His voice was low and even, like he'd been rehearsing the story his whole life. I just nodded. He leaned back, eyes on the window, watching the fog drag itself across the glass. "Before it was Pine Hollow Cemetery," he said. "It was a mining camp, back in the 1800s, place called Black Vein Ridge." He took a slow sip of coffee, the cup trembling slightly in his old hands. "They found silver in the mountain back in '73. Word spread fast, and men came from all over, miners, drifters, families. Built the camp right on top of the ridge. No maps, no permits, just greed and God's mercy." He paused for a moment, eyes far away. "They dug deep, too deep. Folks back then didn't understand fault lines or gas pockets. All they knew was that the deeper they went, the richer it got. Until the day it didn't." He looked at me then, steady and grim. "They called it a collapse, but that ain't what happened. The ground didn't fall. It took them." He said it so calmly that it took me a second to process the words. "What do you mean, took them?" I asked. Harold set his cup down. "The survivors said it wasn't the mountain caving in. It was the ground itself rising up, like it wanted them back. Said they heard voices in the tunnels before it happened. Soft at first, then clearer. Voices calling them by name. Then the earth opened up and swallowed them whole." He looked back out the window again, toward the direction of Section D. "When the town built the cemetery 50 years later, they didn't know where the old shafts ran, but they built right over the ridge anyway. Section D sits right on top of what used to be the main tunnel." A slow dread sank through me as he spoke, like ice water running down my spine. "So the miners are still down there?" I asked. He gave a single, tired nod. "Not just the miners. Everything the ground took with them, lanterns, tools, even part of the shaft walls. They say some nights, when the fog rolls in, you can still hear the picks striking rock." I swallowed hard, staring into the black surface of my coffee. "Is that what the humming was?" Harold didn't answer right away. He just stared at his reflection in the window, 2 lantern lights flickering in his eyes. "Some say it's the earth settling," he said finally. "Others say it's them, the ones who never stopped digging, still trying to find their way out." He stood, walked over to the corkboard, and pointed to the paper with the rules. "These aren't folklore, kid. They're boundaries. The ground down there, it remembers. The lamps, the gates, the silence, all of it's to keep the balance. So long as we follow the rules, the dead stay where they belong." I tried to laugh, but the sound caught in my throat. "You're saying the cemetery keeps them trapped?" Harold turned toward me, eyes hollow. "I'm saying the rules keep us safe." He poured himself another cup, hand shaking a little more now. "Every caretaker who's worked this grounds had a night like yours. First the glow, then the voices, then the visitor." He looked down at his cup. "If they make it through all that, they learn to respect the rules." "And the ones who don't?" I asked. Harold met my eyes. His voice dropped low enough I almost didn't catch it. "They join the hum." We sat there in silence again. The coffee had gone cold, but I couldn't move. I kept thinking about the way the earth had felt alive under my hands, the way it had whispered my name. After a while, Harold stood and went to the door, He looked out toward Section D, where the fog was thinning, the soil dark and slick like wet coal. "Sun'll be up soon," he said quietly. "Don't ever mistake quiet for peace, kid. Out here, the quiet just means the ground's listening." He closed the door, and for a long time after that, neither of us spoke. But as I sat there, staring at that paper with the rules, I swear I could still hear the faintest vibration running through the floorboards, like something far beneath us was waiting for its turn to speak. By the time dawn rolled in, I felt like I'd aged a year in a single night. The fog had thinned to a pale veil drifting low across the ground, and the sky was starting to break open with that gray-pink light that only Montana mornings know, the kind that makes even the coldest place look soft for a few minutes, until you remember what's under it. I packed up my gear, flashlight, logbook, Harold's old thermos, and slipped on my gloves. Harold had already gone. He didn't say goodbye, didn't need to. He never said much at the end of a shift, just nodded toward the door like a soldier being relieved from duty. The air outside felt heavier somehow, damp and still humming faintly under my boots. I told myself it was just the generator or the wind, but I knew better now. My truck sat parked by the north gate, waiting like a promise. That road led straight to town. 10 miles of gravel and peace. I could practically taste the diner coffee and see the sunlight bouncing off the chrome of passing semis. The padlock on the gate was still hanging open from last night. I smiled a little. Easy exit. Then I remembered Rule 6. At dawn, leave through the south gate only, never the north. I stood there for a long time, staring at the lock, wondering how far superstition could really stretch. I'd followed every rule since the night began, except one, and that one had nearly broken me. Now, I just wanted out. "Come on," I muttered under my breath. "It's a gate, not a demon." I stepped closer, one hand on the iron bar. The metal was ice cold, slick with dew. I gave it a little push, and it creaked open without a fight. The road beyond looked empty, pale gravel fading into morning mist. But something about it felt wrong. You know that feeling when you're about to walk into a room and realize someone's already there? That pause your body makes before your mind even catches up? That's what it felt like, only the feeling wasn't coming from ahead. It was coming from behind me. The air shifted. The hum I'd felt all night, deep and low under the soil, started to rise again. It wasn't loud, just enough to make the gravel vibrate under my boots. I froze. "Harold?" I called out. My voice sounded small in the morning air. No answer. Then, from somewhere out past Section D, I heard the sound of shifting earth. Not wind, not trees. Like something heavy rolling beneath the ground, dragging itself closer. I turned back toward the gate. The hum grew stronger. The padlock that had been hanging loose suddenly rattled against the post, metal clanging sharp in the still air. I stepped back. The gate swung shut on its own, hard. The impact rang through the morning like a gunshot, echoing across the headstones. The lock snapped closed, tight, perfect, as if an invisible hand had sealed it. The sound stopped the hum. Everything went still again. I stood there staring at it, heart hammering, breath fogging the cold air. The road beyond the bars was still there, real, bright, free. But I knew I wasn't supposed to take it. The rules weren't just written for order. They were boundaries. And whatever lived beneath that ground had decided to remind me. I turned away from the gate, throat dry, and started walking toward the south path. Every step I took, the air seemed to lighten, the hum fading behind me. By the time I reached the south gate, the sun had climbed high enough to spill gold across the fields. That gate was standing open, quiet, still, waiting. I didn't question it. I just walked through. When my boots hit the gravel road, I finally exhaled. The sound of the wind picked up again, soft and real this time. No hum, no voices, no whispers. But when I turned back one last time, I saw it. The north gate, barely visible through the trees. was swinging open again. Slowly. Like something inside the cemetery was watching me leave and giving me a choice I didn't dare take. I climbed into my truck, shut the door, and didn't look back. As I drove down that empty road, the town rising in the distance, I couldn't shake the thought that maybe the rules weren't made by men like Harold at all. Maybe they were written for us, by the ground itself. I came back the next evening, just before dusk. The drive up that long gravel road felt different now. Heavier somehow, like the air itself knew I'd been warned. Every bump and curve looked familiar, but the landscape didn't feel the same. You ever go somewhere after a bad dream and swear the world's been rearranged just slightly? That's what Pine Hollow felt like. The sky was a bruised purple when I pulled up to the gate. This time, the padlock was already open. I didn't question it. I just eased the truck through and parked by the office. The first thing I noticed was the silence. No wind, no crickets, just the crunch of gravel under my boots and the faint echo of my own heartbeat. When I reached the office door, I stopped cold. There, tacked dead center on the wood, was a fresh sheet of paper. Same yellowed typewriter font. Same title at the top, Rules for Night Staff, Pine Hollow Cemetery. But this one looked newer, cleaner. The edges weren't curled like the old one. The ink was darker, still wet enough to shine under the porch light. And at the bottom, beneath Rule 6, was a new line, typed in sharp, deliberate strokes. 7. If you survive your first night, don't quit. It only gets worse when you try to leave. I read it 3 times before it sank in. The paper trembled slightly in my hand, though the wind hadn't moved. I glanced around, half expecting Harold to be nearby, watching, maybe even smirking like this was some kind of twisted joke. But he wasn't there. The office door creaked as I opened it. Inside, everything looked exactly the same. The logbook, the 2 mugs, the faint smell of coffee and kerosene. Except for one thing. The old rules sheet, the one I'd stared at all last night, was gone. I checked the wall, the desk, even under the logbook. Nothing. Just that new page outside, still pinned to the door like it belonged there. When Harold finally came in, I was sitting at the table, staring at the fresh paper like it might start moving on its own. He didn't even look at it, just hung up his coat, poured himself coffee, and sat down across from me. "You see it?" I asked. He nodded, slow. Every caretaker does. After their first night, I swallowed hard. "You at it?" He didn't answer right away, just stared into his mug, the steam curling around his face like fog. Finally, he said, "I don't write the rules, kid. The ground does." I waited for him to laugh, to explain it, to say anything that made sense, but he just sipped his coffee and leaned back in his chair. "What's that supposed to mean?" I asked. "The ground writes them?" He looked at me then, really looked, and there was something in his eyes I hadn't seen before. Pity. "You think paper lasts out here?" he said quietly. "Every few years, the old list fades or disappears. Then a new one shows up. Same rules, sometimes more. Always typed, always fresh, and no one ever sees who puts it there." He leaned forward, elbows on the table. "Once you've made it through your first night, this place knows you. That's why you can't quit. If you try, it calls you back." I shook my head, trying to process it. "You're saying the cemetery, what, keeps us here?" "I'm saying," he said, "the dead don't forget who's watching over them." He stood then, walked to the window, and looked out toward the hills where Section D lay hidden beneath the fog. "The first time I tried to leave," he said, voice low, "I made it 6 miles down the road before the engine died. When I popped the hood, I found a handful of dirt sitting right on top of the battery. Damp, cold, like it had just come from a grave." He turned back toward me. "So, I came back. Been here ever since." I sat there frozen, the air thick around us. Outside, the fog began to rise again, creeping low across the ground like it was listening in. Neither of us said another word. We didn't have to. Because I finally understood something. Something I think every caretaker learns eventually. The rules aren't there to protect the living from the dead. They're there to protect the living from the cemetery itself. And as I sat there watching Harold pour another cup of coffee, I realized what scared me most wasn't that the rules had changed. It was that they'd changed for me. It's been 6 months now. 6 months since my first night at Pine Hollow. 6 months since the ground whispered my name, and I still haven't left. I tell people I like the quiet, that I enjoy working alone, that it's peaceful out here under the stars, surrounded by history and stillness. But that's not the truth. The truth is, I stay because I don't think Pine Hollow would let me go. The days are easy enough. I trim the grass, clear leaves from the old sections, polish the newer headstones when families visit. The air smells of soil and pine, and sometimes it almost feels normal. Almost. But when the sun drops behind the ridge and the light turns that coppery gray, everything changes. The silence comes back, that same heavy silence that feels alive. Some nights I swear I see figures moving between the rows, soft silhouettes in the fog, walking slow, brushing their hands over the stones like they're checking names, making sure they're still remembered. Other nights the fog doesn't move at all. It just sits there, watching, and the hum starts again. Always faint at first, like a heartbeat through dirt, then deeper, louder, patient, and steady. When it happens, I sit inside the office with the lantern off and my hands flat on the desk. You can feel it through the wood, the vibration, the rhythm. Sometimes it feels like it's matching your pulse, like the cemetery itself is breathing with you. I've stopped questioning it, stopped trying to explain it, stopped thinking there's a difference between what's buried and what's alive. Because I've learned something working here. The rules aren't about superstition. They're about respect, about balance. You don't walk past Section D after midnight because the ground still remembers the ones it took, and it doesn't like being stepped on. You don't relight the lamps because the dark here isn't absence. It's rest. You don't answer the whistling because not every voice calling your name belongs to the living. I follow the rules, every single one, because I've seen what happens when you don't. Once, a new caretaker came up from Billings. Didn't last long. He laughed at the rules, said ghosts didn't scare him. That first night, he took the north gate out at dawn. They found his truck abandoned halfway down the ridge, door open, engine running, and the driver's seat full of fresh topsoil. No sign of him. Not above ground, anyway. Harold didn't say a word about it, just replaced the keys on the hook and added another name to the caretaker's list on the wall. One more photograph. One more man swallowed by the job. These days, I don't think of Pine Hollow as a graveyard anymore. It's more like a mouth, a hungry one, patient and ancient. And men like me, we're its teeth. We keep it fed just enough to stop it from biting back. Sometimes, in the still hours before dawn, I sit outside the office with my thermos and listen to the hum roll beneath the ground. If you listen long enough, the voices start to separate. The miners, the soldiers, the mothers, the children, all whispering together in a single rhythm, not begging, not haunting, just remembering. That's all they want, really. To not be forgotten. And maybe that's what the rules really are. Not orders, but reminders, agreements between the living and the buried. So I stay. I follow the rules. I keep the lamps burning low, and I make sure the gates stay locked. Because here in Pine Hollow Cemetery, the dead don't rest. They remember. And all they ask in return is that we don't forget them. We don't.